Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Snyder. Ms. Ansell.
Sure. Thank you, Senators Lieu and Block, for having me today. It's a pleasure to come and share Indiana's story. It's also a pleasure to have a brief reprieve from Indiana in the database. I could say this, it's the most horrible winter we've ever had. So I've been enjoying your sunshine, so thank you for that. I think part of our experience in Indiana has come from our position as a coordinating board. So just a little background on us. Our statutory charge is to oversee and coordinate a system of higher education. We don't run the institutions. We don't have the authority to run the institutions. What we do have the authority to do is approve degree programs, collect data. We make budget recommendations that are then acted on by our General Assembly. We approve capital projects, and then we distribute $300 million of financial aid from our state aid programs. Those are specific authorities, and as I mentioned, none of those give us the ability to go into an institution and say, here's what we want you to do, do it. So how do we advance the policies that we have advanced in Indiana? The first strategy we have of 4 that I'll mention today is we lead the process of setting the statewide goals. So this has to be a process that engages all the stakeholders, that relies on the institutions and what they think is possible, that relies on workforce data and the needs of the state. And there needs to be some sort of honest broker in the middle of that process, and we've served that role in our state. We've also relied heavily on our national partners for the purpose of setting our strategic plans, and in fact, Ms. Snyder was instrumental in helping us set the last version of ours. We had our first strategic plan came out in 2007. We've had 2 updates since, the latest in 2012, which I believe is in the big red packet that you have. So we've been evolving, and we've been working on this, and we continue to grow as we learn more and as we see what's working and what isn't working. The second strategy is to collect and publish data, and the publish is the important part of that. Our plan identifies metrics that matter. There aren't a ton of them. I think there are 6. But we have been really relentless in making sure that we're getting those numbers in, that the institutions set the targets that we ask them to set underneath our statewide goals. So we approached it from a strategy of setting high-level statewide goals, such as 60% attainment rate by 2025, a 50% 4-year completion rate by 2018. So we set those broad state goals and then ask the institutions, based on where they're starting and what they think they can do, to set their own institutional goals leading to that statewide goal. So we have collected that data, we have published that data, and we have implemented the first in a series of annual reports that were, the first year of 3 annual reports that we'll continue to do, one being a college readiness report, focusing on developmental education and students coming out of high school and how they're performing. That's our feedback loop for K-12 education. The second is a college completion report, which we finally just completed last week, that looks at on-time graduation rates, but then also looks at the full picture of student completion, including extended time and students that transfer and complete elsewhere or transfer and complete a different degree than the one they originally sought. The third report is a return on investment report that focuses on the workforce outcomes of our higher education system in terms of job opportunities, average salaries 1, 5, and 10 years out, and some other factors. The third strategy we have is working in partnership with our colleges and with some of our funders and national partners on innovation and new models. There are a lot of examples of this across the state. One really visible example has been Ivy Tech Community College, our statewide community college system, working with Complete College America and the Commission to redesign and really flip on its head our developmental education in our state to move into a co-requisite model, which is shown to be much more effective than the traditional course-by-course remediation. So after all that, at some point, there are policies that require a legislative mandate. And that's the fourth strategy we have in being effective is that we have strong partnerships with our legislature. In fact, our commissioner is a former legislator, former chair of the Senate Education Committee. So we have very strong ties with our legislature, and we have been able to successfully lobby for legislation to advance higher education reforms in our state. I'll give you a few examples of those and then move on to just a few lessons we've learned. So the first strategy, or the first legislative change was implementing a performance funding formula, which in its current truly outcome-based form started in 2007. at 2% of operating and now has evolved to 6% of operating in the last budget cycle. We have mission-differentiated metrics in those, so not every institution is paid for the same thing, but it does pay for what we value in terms of completion, faster completion, at-risk completion, high-impact degrees in STEM completion, as well as student persistence, successful remediation, and others. As we're paying for what we value to the institutions directly, we've also started, as of last year, paying for what we value with students themselves within our student financial aid system. Last year, we passed legislation with the General Assembly that tied student financial aid eligibility to completing 24 credits per year, and that's completing, not enrolling, so that's an important distinction. Provides more money for students that complete 30 credits per year, and even more that would go on a sort of degree in 3 program and complete 39 credits in a particular year. It also pays an additional incentive bonus for students keeping their GPA up at a 3.0 or more. Students, if they get an associate degree and then go on to a bachelor's, in the second portion would get an additional bump. And as I mentioned, if they take an accelerated pace. So we're truly paying for what we value as students, and that's had actually a double impact, where not only are the students responding to that incentive, the colleges are responding to that incentive, because that student financial aid coming in is actually more than the total performance funding. So the colleges have an incentive to make sure students know what it is that they're supposed to be doing and provide support for them along the way. So we've seen an impact from performance funding. We've seen even more urgency on the part of the colleges now that we have the student financial aid incentives. In that same piece of legislation, our legislature called on public universities to give each student a degree map, a course-by-course, semester-by-semester list of classes they need to take to graduate on time. And a key component is to guarantee that the courses will be available. If a student is mapped for a course and it's not available in the semester that it's mapped, or it's canceled, or it's at the same time as another class, or they don't have the prerequisite because it wasn't mapped before, any of those situations, that student will get that course for free when they're able to take it. And then the last piece of legislation I'll mention, and this is a series over the past 3 years of streamlined transfer, implementing a 30-credit general education core that's a guaranteed transfer among all public institutions, as well as we're working now, we have the law, we're working on implementing 60-credit articulation pathways that are uniform for all of our public institutions. And then finally, we passed legislation with the General Assembly that was credit creep reform, so it called on our colleges to scale back their credit requirements to 120 and 60, which is basically what will help a student graduate on time, unless there is a clear reason, such as accreditation or something that would cause them to need to go over that. We polled the institutions. We found that saving our Hoosier taxpayers and students over $35 million a year. So the lessons we've learned and that I would convey to you from our experience in Indiana, first, at the state level, it's really important to focus on creating the conditions for change. So at the state level and at our commission level and at our legislature, we're not going to go into the institutions and say, you need this many advisors or you need to implement this sort of support program. But what we do is create the conditions that it's in their best interest to do those things and to figure out what's going to work for them. So paying for what you value is a critical component to that with both the students and the universities. It is important to be very committed to transparency, public reporting, and tracking progress. And I'll give you this example. I'm going to give you 2 statements. We need to increase the completion rates of our student financial aid recipients. Statement number 2, did you know that on your campus, only 1% of your student financial aid recipients are graduating on time? Which of those is a stronger call to action? So we have been, as I mentioned, those 3 reports, we've not only been publishing them, we've been highlighting them in the press, we've been talking about them in our monthly commission meetings, and we've been integrating that information as a call to action in all of the policy discussions we have at every level. The final lesson I will share is that institutions are going to be the drivers of the change. They're going to be the ones implementing the change. They're going to be the ones ultimately in the reports. You know, it doesn't say the Commission for Higher Education has a graduation rate that looks like this. It's the institutions that do. So it's important for us to be in a state of constant partnership with our institutions, and they give input into these legislative proposals that we take to the General Assembly. They certainly help with the implementation of those, and we've encouraged our legislators to be fairly broad in the language and allow for our commission to work with the universities on coming up with specific guidance related to particular law. So I can give you a few examples. If you'd like, I will let you ask me for them and how we've collaborated with them. But really relying on their expertise, meeting with them. Our commissioner met with each of the college presidents before we finalized our strategic plan. That's at the very high level. We also met with all of our college presidents talking about specifically how are we going to define on-time completion, what cohort, what group, all those data details that go over many of our heads. We talked about that with the colleges at every level as well. So that concludes my formal statements. I'd be happy to take any questions you have.
Thank you, Ms. Ansell. Questions, Senator?
Your coordinating board, it's a commission? What do you call yourself?
We're the Commission for Higher Education.
Commission for Higher Education. Mm-hmm. And who created you?
We're created in statute.
In statute. And how many members do you have, and what's the context of who's your members?
Sure. Our official commission members we're a 14-member board. They're all governor appointees. We have one from each congressional district plus 2 at large, and then we also have a faculty commission member and a student commission member. That commission is supported by a staff of, I believe, 38, but more than half of that is dedicated to the administration of financial aid. 2 years ago, we had our commission, which is our policymaking entity. Separately, we had a state agency that administered financial aid. We just merged those together in 2012. So more than half of our staff is from that agency with financial aid.
Okay. So your agency deals with the financial aid part of it too?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
So we have people on staff that take phone calls and send out award letters and that.
And you're part of the state's budget?
We are part of the state's budget.
Okay. Thank you.
Ms. Ansell, just following up on the financial aid piece, explain again, if you would, how do you use financial aid to incentivize the universities to be more efficient?
Sure. Well, it's a student incentive, but financial aid is a big part of the money that comes in that helps support the operating of a state institution. And in Indiana, we're 6th in the country on the per capita funding in state financial aid. So it is a significant amount of money. So for a college, accepting a state financial aid recipient, it's in their best interest not only to make sure that student knows what's required of them so that they can stay eligible so they don't end up needing to drop out because of lack of funding, but also they'll get more student financial aid dollars into those Bursar accounts of those students if the student, say, completes 30 credits instead of 24. So it's an incentive on the colleges to help ensure student success because the student success is tied to the student's funding and the student's ability to persist and graduate.
Yeah.
I just want to add to that. I think that the reforms that Indiana made are directly linked to a lot of research that's been taking place around student financial aid policy that shows that intensity of enrollment is key to student success. Right. And so this requires a certain sort of intensity of enrollment, achieving 15 credits within a calendar year, not within a semester, within a calendar year. So it does account for those part-time students, but requires them to stay on track. And so, but the incentive is also, as she noted, built into the institutions as well.
Sure, and I'll add that it was a fairly logical argument for us to make. That's not to say it was easy or that everybody accepted it initially, but our state aid was already limited to full-time students and already limited to 4 years. So for a student that's not staying on pace for a 4-year graduation, they're at risk of getting to that 5th year and either dropping out because of lack of funding after investing 4 years of their time and money, or having to rely heavily on student loans, neither of which we felt was a good option. And we surveyed our students and said, what would you do if you got to year 5 and you hadn't graduated and you have no funding? And I believe it was 12% said they would just stop. So it was, looking at that, it was fairly easy to say, we need to send clearer signals to our students and shorter benchmarks to them of what they should be accomplishing to get to the finish line.
Thank you. Ms. Snyder, you seem to recommend having a commission or coordinating body of some type. Now, California, you probably know, until a few years ago, had one, the Commission on Post-Secondary Education here in California. and yet we got into this dilemma we're in now, notwithstanding having a commission. It occurs to me that there must be some things that make some coordinating bodies or commissions more successful than others. Do you find in looking at the states significant markers in terms of which commissions or coordinating bodies succeed and which flounder, and what do you suggest?
Well, I think that the success of a coordinating board or commission doesn't really necessarily have to do with the structure of that governance. I think, as Sarah has noted, it's a variety of things. It includes, obviously, input and collaboration with institutions. But I think the legislature and the policymakers of this state play a key role in driving what the commission or coordinating board should be doing towards the state public agenda. In all of the states I talked about, the legislature provided a very broad but comprehensive framework that defined what the expectations are and what is needed for the state. And the commission or the coordinating body played the role in furthering that and putting the meat on the bones of that. But I think it's a combination of strong state policy leadership, and certainly you need some sort of centralized or body that can coordinate across the broad stakeholders. I think that the exact governance of that can be varied, and we do see it varied. And really, a lot of it comes back to the leadership of the state policymakers. I don't know, Sarah, if you have different input, but
Sure,
Okay.
I would echo that.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions, comments?
No.
Okay, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to thank you both for the time that you've shared with us, and we'll probably go back and ask more questions as we move forward.
Yeah, and thank NCSL for facilitating this particular part of the program. And back to you now for the next panel.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, ladies. Okay, our final panel is our higher education segments. We have Amy Dorr at the University of California, Ephraim Smith, Cal State University, and Patrick Perry from the community colleges. Please join us.
Good morning. Nice to see you again. I think it was last year, right?
Well, good morning. Well, you've heard, hopefully, some of the comments that previous panel members have been making regarding what we're interested in terms of furthering this conversation on accountability. And we'd like to know from our segments, what do you think?
Thank you. I will start with my prepared comments. They are also being passed out, and a sheet about UC's education of students from low-income first-generation families. Senators Lieu and Block and committee members, thank you very much for having me. I'm very pleased to join my colleagues, my CSU and community college colleagues, in talking about perspectives on accountability. And we really appreciate the opportunity to do so. The University of California is committed to providing a high-level education consistent with our responsibilities as delineated in the master plan. Along with the quality expected of California's research university system, we value and promote access, affordability, and student success at the undergraduate and graduate levels. We have been and continue to be committed to continuous improvement and accountability for our performance. As a system, we have several performance assessment processes in place. We've been part of the legislature's accountability effort for over 10 years, and we have appreciated the efforts to include us in this work and the invitations such as this one to provide input into it. For the last 5 years, UC has published an accountability report. It is available on the web, and I brought one to wave around just a little. I'm doing it this way so you can see it is a very substantial report. It has data over time and data on most of the things, if not all, that one might think you might want to know about what the University of California is doing in education, in research, in costs, etc. The next report will be out in July. You can find it on the web. I'm going to leave this one here, but you can find the whole report on the web. And for most of the data, you can go in and actually get the data and do your own analyses. The response that UC will submit to AB 94, which has a lot of information on performance outcomes requested, will be based largely on what's in the accountability report. What I'd like to do for a moment is share with you a few major findings in 4 areas that are among those that we believe are very appropriate for assessing UC's performance in undergraduate education. I'm going to give you the area generally as sort of a conclusion and a little bit of concrete data. So in the first area, our graduation rates for freshmen and transfers are very good. They're higher than most of our peer public research universities across the country, and the rates show steady improvement over time. Our recent 4-year freshman rate is 63%. It's up a little from the year before and about 17 points from 10 or 12 years ago. It is higher by about almost 10% than the average of our peer public research universities. And our 6-year graduation rate is 84%, which is very high. Our most recent 2-year transfer graduation rate is 55%. That's up a little from last year and up 18 points from about 15 years ago. The 4-year rate is 86%, right on a par with the 6-year rate of native freshmen. In the second area, we educate a very high percentage of undergraduates from low-income families, which we index by receiving a Pell Grant, and the percent is much higher than that of peer public research universities. Currently, 42% of our undergraduate student body was a Pell recipient. It's been going up every year, and Pell does change its standards, so we also have to take that into account. But 42% now, that's about 77,000 undergraduates. Our peer research universities, the comparable figure is under 25%. And if we go to our peer privates, it's way under, and some of our own campuses would beat all the privates. So a third area, our Pell recipients succeed at UC. They take longer to finish their bachelor's degree on average, but they do finish at almost the same rate as students who have no Pell ever. If we look at students who enter as freshmen, at 4 years, there's a 13% gap, but at 6 years, the graduation rates are almost identical. Okay? Same thing is true for transfer students. There's a 14-point gap at 2 years, but if you look at what proportion of students have graduated in 4 years, it's almost identical. There's a little room to work on, but a little. And just a fourth area, tuition has increased enormously during the most recent period. There's no question about that. But a UC undergraduate education continues to be affordable. About half of our most recent graduating seniors graduated with no debt at all. Students from lower income families generally pay no tuition at all. They are more likely to graduate with debt than are students from higher income families, but the average debt for any student who graduates with debt is about the same. It's about $20,000, which, according to our estimates, is manageable debt for a college graduate. Over a 10-year repayment period, about 6% interest, it's about $230 a month payment. So those are some examples of areas where we believe we should be measured and where we are measuring what we're doing now and looking for improvements. And in some cases in persistence against odds as we've been defunded. But along with our reporting and transparency efforts, UC has long been engaged in efforts to understand and improve its performance. I want to describe two efforts very briefly. At the undergraduate level, as a follow-up to a May 2013 Regents item on academic performance indicators, we've been investigating factors that impact bachelor degree completion rates and the time it took to complete the degree, and campus strategies that are associated with doing better. And our intention is to work with each campus to be sure to share all the best practices, share what we know about what matters, and assist them all in doing better, even though we're doing very well. As a second example, in line with our mission as outlined in the master plan, and again as a follow-up to a Regents item, this one on doctoral education, we are investigating ways to improve our competitiveness to attract, retain, and graduate PhD students. We do have some ideas and some practices and policies in place, but we are gathering more, and we will have an all-UC meeting on the topic in April. The Regents have asked us on both of these topics to come back to them with reports on what we know and how we can do better and what we're going to do about that. As an aside, I also want to say that our new president, Napolitano, is working closely with the new CSU Chancellor, Tim White, and the new Community College Chancellor, Bryce Harris, to work together as the three public segments of higher education on some of the goals that we very much share for our own systems and also for the well-being of all of our systems together. Now, before offering recommendations for a performance accountability system, I want to address workforce preparation for a minute. I will say that UC has been responsive to a variety of articulated workforce needs. For instance, STEM, we have increased our STEM productivity at all levels considerably, and at the current time, 44% of our undergraduates are graduating in a STEM field. And if you compare us to UC productivity and California private productivity overall, bachelor's and graduate degrees, we're higher, but not hugely higher than CSU and higher still than the privates. We've also worked on literacy for our undergraduates, and in professional programs, we've increased output with nurses, teachers, and school administrators at various times. I do want to say, however, that a high-quality undergraduate education prepares students to meet many of the needs that are in every job, to think critically, to be a lifelong learner and a self-starter, to communicate well, and probably to be able to manage job change, which is very common these days. It will also often prepare our undergraduates for specific workforce needs, and it certainly prepares them for changing jobs and for citizenship. Our students are the state's future workforce. They are also our future citizens, voters, artists, thinkers, inventors, parents, and much more. They are much more than their professions or jobs, as is their value to California. So finally, to conclude, based on UC's experience and drawing on the advice from our experts, of which, like all institutions, we do have in these areas, we identify 8 desirable characteristics of a performance accountability system. One is that the focus should be on outcomes, not on inputs. 2, performance should be compared to that of peer institutions. 3, realistic goals and timetables should be established, and appropriate support should be available in order to achieve the goals. 4, the number of goals should be small. They should address the most important outcomes for the specific public higher education system. 5, goals should not conflict with one another or promote perverse incentives. And that's easy to do unfortunately. 6, measures should be ones that can be reliably assessed at a reasonable cost. 7, trend data should be provided to assess progress to date and where one is going. And 8th and finally, the accountability system should be regularly examined and should improve over time. Publishing outcome measures, what the goals are, who you're compared to, how you're doing over time, promotes transparency and accountability, and provides information that is important for the state to discuss with the segment leaders. We should make performance public. UC stands ready to work with the legislature on performance outcome measures and goals and appreciates the opportunity to offer suggestions today. Thank you.